Hi, welcome to part 5 on our segment related to other 20th century movements. In this video, we're going to be looking at abstract expressionism. This group of artists was known as the abstract expressionist. They emerged in the United States in the years following World War II. As the term suggests, their work was characterized by non-objective imagery that appeared emotionally charged with personal meaning. The artists, however, rejected these implications of the name. They insisted their subjects were not abstract, but rather primal images deeply rooted in society's collective unconsciousness. Their paintings did not express mere emotion. They communicated universal truths about the human condition. For these reasons, another term, the New York School, offers a more accurate descriptor of this group, for although some eventually relocated, their distinctive aesthetic first found form in New York City. The rise of the New York School reflects the broader cultural context of the mid-20th century, especially the shift away from Europe as a center of intellectual and artistic innovation in the West. Much of abstract expressionism's significance stems from its status as the first American visual art movement to gain international acclaim. What you're looking at is an image by Mark Rothko, who is a very famous abstract expressionist. He was also sort of referred to as a color field painter. You can sort of see that with these sort of large expanses and of color, and again, very non-objective imagery. We'll talk a little bit more about his work in a minute. Barnett Newman was also an artist associated with this movement. He wrote, "We felt the moral crisis of a world in shambles, a world destroyed by a Great Depression and a fierce world war, and it was impossible at the time to paint the kind of paintings that we were doing, flowers, reclining nudes, and people playing the cello. Although distinguished by individual styles, the abstract expressionists shared common artistic and intellectual interest. While not expressively political, most of the artists held strong convictions based on Marxist ideas of social and economic equality." So this is an image done by Barnett Newman called Stations of the Cross. It's 14 panels, supposedly of abstract art retelling the story of Christ's Passion. The growth of fascism in Europe had brought a wave of immigrant artists to the United States in the 1930s, which gave Americans greater access to ideas and practices of European modernism. They sought training at the school founded by German painter Hans Hofmann and from Joseph Albers, who left the Bauhaus, which was in Germany, in 1933 to teach at the experimental Black Mountain College in North Carolina, and later at Yale University. This European presence made clear the formal innovations of Cubism, as well as the psychological undertones and automatic painting techniques of Surrealism. Whereas Surrealism had found inspiration in the theories of Sigmund Freud, the abstract expressionists looked more to the Swiss psychologist Carl Jung and his explanations of primitive archetypes that were a part of our collective human experience. They also gravitated towards existential philosophy, made popular by European intellectuals such as Martin Heidegger and Jean-Paul Sartre. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Given the atrocities of World War II, existentialism appealed to the abstract expressionist. Sartre's position is that an individual's action might give life meaning, suggested the importance of the artist's creative process. Through the artist's physical struggles with his material, a painting itself might ultimately come to serve as a lasting mark of one's existence. Each of these artists involved with abstract expressionism eventually developed an individual style that can be easily recognized as evidence of his artistic practice and contribution. Most abstract expressionist paintings are large-scale, meaning they're very huge canvases, include non-objective imagery, lack a clear focal point, and show visible signs of the artist's work in progress, but these characteristics are not consistent in every example. So this is one artist that we're going to be looking at in more detail, William de Kooning. In his case, Woman 1, you can actually see the visible brushstrokes and thickly applied pigment, and they're very typical of his style of painting, which was referred to as action painting. And this style of abstract expressionism is also associated with Jackson Pollock. We'll look at an example of his work towards the end. Looking at Woman 1, we can easily imagine de Kooning at work using strong, slashing gestures, adding gobs of paint to create heavily built-up surfaces that could be physically worked and reworked with his brush and palette knife. De Kooning's central image is clearly recognizable, reflecting the tradition of the female nude through art history. Born in the Netherlands, de Kooning was trained in the European academic traditions, unlike his American colleagues. Although he produced many non-objective works throughout his career, his early background might be one factor in his frequent return to the figure. In contrast to the dynamic appearance of de Kooning's art, Mark Rothko, whose paintings we're looking at now, and Barnett Newman exemplify what is sometimes called color imagist or color field style of abstract expressionism. These artists produce large-scale, non-objective imagery as well, but their work lacks the energetic intensity and gestural quality of action painting. Rothko's mature paintings exemplify this tendency. His subtly rendered rectangles appear to float against their backgrounds. For artists like Rothko, these images were meant to encourage meditation and personal reflection. Barnett Newman's Ver Heroica Sublimis illustrates this lofty goal. In this painting, Newman relies on zips, Z-I-P-S, vertical lines that punctuate the painted field on the background to serve a dual function. While they visually highlight the expanse of contrasting colors around them, they metaphorically reflect our own presence as individuals within our potentially overwhelming surroundings. Newman's paintings evoke the 18th century notion of the sublime, a philosophical concept related to the spiritual understanding of humanity's place among the greater forces of the universe. Throughout the 1950s, abstract expressionism became the dominant influence on artists both in the United States and abroad. The U.S. government embraced its distinctive style as a reflection of American democracy, individualism, and cultural achievement, and actively promoted international exhibitions of abstract expressionism as a form of political agenda during the years of the Cold War. However, many artists found it difficult to replicate the emotional authenticity implicit in the stylistic innovations of de Kooning and Pollock. Their work appeared studied and lacked the same vitality of the first generation of these pioneers of abstract expressionism. Others saw the metaphysical undertones of abstract expressionism at odds with society, increasingly concerned with a consumer mentality, fueled by economic success and proliferation of the mass media. Such reactions would inevitably lead to the emergence of pop art, minimalism, and the rise of a range of new artistic developments in the mid-20th century. So what you're looking at is a work by Jackson Pollock. He's one of my favorite abstract expressionists. He was very famous because he had this technique where he would take unstretched canvas and lay it on the floor. These were very large-scale paintings, and he would drip and splatter and pour the paint onto the canvas. Some people thought that he went into this sort of state or transitory state, or like he sort of went into this unconscious state while he did it. And at first I know abstract expressionism, you probably look at it and you're like, oh my goodness, I could do that. But again, it's more about concept, and it's definitely we're dealing, and it's really a way for artists to sort of kind of try to figure out how to create something new. Art and art production has been going on since, the beginning of time, or the beginning of at least written history. And, and artists really today struggle with that, trying to move away and trying to create something new. And that's why you have these artists who are, trying different mediums, using and experimenting with different materials. And so art really can change in form and medium, and obviously in subject matter as well, where it can be non-objective. So this is an image called Enchanted Forest, and it really exemplifies his mature abstract compositions that he did create with this sort of pouring and dripping and splattering method. And he, you have to look at it. It's hard to see in person. It's really hard to appreciate some of these paintings because of their large scale, and obviously getting up close and seeing some of the brushwork and layering technique. It's hard to appreciate in a slide. But he opens up more dense construction of layered color, by allowing large areas of white to kind of come through the network of moving and expanding lines. So, he allows the natural canvas to kind of come through, and the negative space becomes just as important. He also reduced his palette, restraining his colors to gold, black, red, and white. And he creates a delicate balance of form and color through sort of creating these rhythms of line that surge, swell, retreat, and pause, only briefly before sort of plunging into these other sort of different or, lyrical lines. And so his images, to me, have a lot of, motion. And again, he was considered an action painter, where you can actually see his mark making and his strokes. One's eye follows eagerly, pursuing first one dripping rope of color, then another, without being arrested by any dominant focus. So, again, there's really not one point of interest. And so, it is easy to maybe look at something like this and sort of get lost in it and sort of have a sort of meditative experience. Rather than describing a form, Pollock's line thus becomes a continuous form itself. Michael Fried, a scholar, has described Pollock's achievement. His all-over line does not give rise to positive and negative areas. There is no inside or outside to Pollock's line or to the space through which it moves, and that is tantamount to claiming that line in Pollock's all-over drip method. Paintings of 1947 through 50 have been freed at last from the job of describing contours and bounding shapes. It is this redefinition of the traditional capacity of the artist's formal means, and formal is, composition, alluding to line, shape, color, texture, those sorts of design elements, that distinguishes Pollock's art in the history of modernism. So we're going to go back and look at the work of William de Kooning. This is the image that the College Board Association has listed, and it's actually, he's one of my favorite artists. By the middle of the 20th century, William de Kooning had pretty much made it as an artist. He had arrived in New York at the age of 22, and had already created an impressive array of controversial and compelling masterworks that have become touchstones of any account of the 20th century art. But de Kooning's place among these vanguard New York abstract painters wasn't something the artist accepted without question. Indeed, his paintings resulted from a daring use of abstract and figurative imagery that few of his contemporaries could fathom. De Kooning both distanced himself most clearly from his fellow abstract painters and expressed this figurative interest most memorably in his woman paintings, a series that began towards the end of the 1940s and continued into the following decade, upsetting both fans of his earlier canvases and those used to more genteel depictions of the female form.